In a stone chamber deep within the Escorial Palace, a man dressed entirely in black sat motionless before a mountain of paperwork. No courtiers, no music, no laughter, just silence, broken only by the scratch of quill on parchment. Philip II of Spain, ruler of the largest empire Earth had ever seen, spent 16 hours each day reading reports, issuing orders, controlling every detail of governance from Portugal to Peru. He rarely left this room, rarely showed his face to his subjects, ruled an empire that stretched across 4 continents from behind a desk in near total isolation. They called him the Spider King, the silent monarch, El Rey Prudente, the prudent king. But prudence and paranoia are separated by only the thinnest line. And Philip II spent 42 years as king walking that line, convinced that every decision he made was ordained by God himself. This is the story of a man who inherited an empire built on golden faith and transformed it into a machine of religious control so absolute that it consumed his own son, shattered his armies, and left his kingdom spiritually pure, but economically ruined. He believed himself God's instrument on earth. History suggests he may have been correct, but not in the way he imagined. Philip II was born in 1527 into absolute certainty. His father, Charles V, ruled the Holy Roman Empire and the Spanish kingdom simultaneously, a realm so vast the sun never set upon it. But Charles was a warrior emperor, constantly campaigning, endlessly traveling. He understood power as movement, presence, the physical manifestation of authority. Philip understood power differently. As a child, he was educated by devout tutors who taught him that kings were not merely rulers, but shepherds of souls. That authority came from God, not from men. That to govern was to serve divine will, and to fail in governance was to fail God himself. This education created something dangerous, a ruler who never questioned whether his judgments were correct, only whether he had considered them sufficiently. Philip did not see himself as making decisions. He saw himself as discovering God's will through careful analysis and prayer. When Charles V abdicated in 1556, exhausted from decades of war, he divided his empire. The Holy Roman Empire went to Philip's uncle. Everything else went to Philip. Spain, the Netherlands, parts of Italy, the Spanish Americas, the Philippines named for him before he ever saw them. At 29 years old, Philip inherited not just territories, but a sacred responsibility to defend Catholic Christianity against Protestant heresy, Muslim expansion, and the moral decay of a world he believed was sliding toward apocalypse. Most men would have been overwhelmed. Philip was energized. Finally, he could implement the perfect Christian kingdom he had been trained to create, a realm where faith and governance were inseparable, where heresy was treason, where the Inquisition served not merely as religious enforcement, but as the immune system of the state, identifying and eliminating anything that threatened doctrinal purity. He set about building the Escorial, a palace monastery that would serve as his headquarters, part administrative center, part monastery, part mausoleum, massive, austere, geometric, a structure that perfectly reflected Philip's worldview. Order imposed on calm, silence enforced on noise, purity extracted from corruption. The Escorial had no throne room in the traditional sense. Philip did not hold court, did not throw festivals, did not appear before his subjects to be celebrated. He worked, read reports, made decisions, signed documents, governed through bureaucracy and belief. And slowly, without anyone quite noticing how it happened, Spain began to change. Not through reform or revolution, but through the steady application of religious conviction to every aspect of life. The Spanish Inquisition existed before Philip II, but under his rule, it became something new. Not merely a religious institution, but an extension of royal power, a mechanism for ensuring not just doctrinal purity, but political obedience. Philip understood something that modern minds struggle to grasp. In 16th century Europe, there was no distinction between religious belief and political loyalty. To question the church was to question the crown. To convert to Protestantism was not a personal spiritual choice. It was treason against God and kings simultaneously. The Inquisition investigated, interrogated, tortured, and executed. But its true power lay not in what it did, but in what people feared it might do. The knowledge that neighbors might report you, that private conversations might be overheard, that doubt expressed in confession might be shared with authorities. Philip personally reviewed Inquisition cases, read testimonies, approved sentences. He did not see this as cruelty, but as mercy. Better to punish heretics in this life than allow them to damn others in the next. Better to burn 100 bodies than risk 1,000 souls. The logic was airtight if you accepted the premise, and Philip never questioned the premise. What made Philip's use of the Inquisition particularly effective was his refusal to distinguish between small infractions and major heresy. A merchant who missed Mass, a scholar who read forbidden books, a converso, a converted Jew, suspected of secretly maintaining Jewish practices. All were threats to the perfect Christian order. Between 1559 and 1562, the Inquisition arrested and tried Protestants in Valladolid and Seville. Philip personally attended some of the autos da fe, public ceremonies where sentences were pronounced and heretics burned. Witnesses reported that when one condemned man begged Philip for mercy, the king replied coldly, "I would carry the wood to burn my own son if he were as you are." This was not empty rhetoric. Philip meant it literally, and within a decade he would be tested on exactly that promise. Don Carlos was born in 1545, heir to the Spanish throne and the greatest burden Philip would ever carry. The boy was damaged from birth, difficult delivery, possible brain injury. As he grew, the problems multiplied. Violent outbursts, erratic behavior, cruelty to animals and servants, episodes of religious mania alternating with blasphemy. Philip watched his son with growing horror. This was the boy who would inherit his perfect Christian empire. This was the vessel into which Philip had poured every hope for continuing God's work. Carlos was not merely unstable. He became actively treasonous, made contact with Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, planned to flee Spain, spoke openly about murdering his father's ministers and possibly Philip himself. For any king, a treasonous son presents an impossible choice. For Philip II, a man who had promised to burn his own son if he became a heretic, the situation was spiritually catastrophic. In January 1568, Philip made his decision. He personally arrested Don Carlos, confined him to a tower, cut him off from all contact except guards and priests. The official story was that Carlos was mentally ill and required protection from himself. The truth was more complex. Philip could not execute his heir without admitting that God had cursed his bloodline, could not release him without risking everything he had built. Don Carlos died in that tower 6 months later. The official cause was illness. Rumors suggested suicide. Some whispered murder. Philip never spoke publicly about his son's death, buried him quietly, continued governing as if nothing had happened. But something had broken. Witnesses reported that after Carlos's death, Philip became even more isolated, worked longer hours, spoke less. The few portraits from this period show a man aging rapidly, as if carrying a weight that was slowly crushing him. He had chosen his divine mission over his own child. Had he proven his devotion to God? Or had he revealed that his faith was merely a justification for eliminating anyone who threatened his control, even his own blood? Philip never remarried after Carlos's mother died. His later marriages were political necessities that produced more children, but none were raised with the same intensity of expectation. Perhaps he could not bear to create another heir who might force him to choose again. While Philip built his perfect Catholic kingdom behind stone walls, a woman he had never met was building something equally powerful. Protestant England under Elizabeth I. They were mirror images, both born to power, both educated in statecraft, both convinced their cause was righteous. But where Philip saw religious unity as essential to order, Elizabeth saw tolerance as necessary for survival. Their conflict was inevitable. England harbored Protestant refugees, supported Dutch rebels against Spanish rule, raided Spanish treasure ships, and worst of all, executed Mary Queen of Scots, a Catholic monarch with a claim to the English throne. For Philip, Elizabeth was not merely a political rival, but a heretic queen leading souls to damnation. Her very existence was an affront to God's order. She had to be removed, not for political gain, but for spiritual necessity. In 1588, Philip assembled the Spanish Armada, 130 ships, 30,000 men, the largest naval invasion force Europe had ever seen. The plan was to sail to the Netherlands, collect additional troops, and invade England. Philip presented this as a religious crusade. God would ensure victory because the cause was just. The Armada carried priests alongside soldiers, prepared to restore Catholic worship to England after the conquest. Philip micromanaged every detail from the Escorial, chose commanders, reviewed supply lists, sent religious instructions alongside military orders. He approached the invasion with the same bureaucratic precision he applied to everything else. But the Armada was not a bureaucratic problem. It was a military campaign requiring flexibility, quick decisions, and adaptation to circumstances. All qualities Philip's system actively suppressed. The English Navy was smaller but faster, used fire ships, exploited weather, harassed the Spanish fleet as it attempted to coordinate with land forces. Then the storms came. The Armada was shattered. Less than half the ships returned to Spain. Thousands drowned. The invasion failed completely. Philip received the news in the Escorial. His response, according to witnesses, was chilling in its simplicity. "I sent my ships to fight against men, not against the winds and waves of God." He interpreted the disaster not as a military defeat, but as divine judgment. But judgment on whom? On England for its heresy? Or on Spain for presuming to know God's will? Philip never answered that question publicly, but privately something shifted. The endless confidence began to crack. After the Armada, Philip had 20 more years to rule. 2 decades of declining health, mounting debt, and the slow realization that his perfect Christian kingdom was collapsing under its own weight. The Spanish economy had been sustained by American silver. Rivers of precious metal flowing from the New World, funding armies, building palaces, financing the Inquisition. But silver cannot replace productivity, cannot manufacture goods, cannot create sustainable wealth. Spain became a paradox, the richest empire on earth and simultaneously bankrupt. Philip declared state bankruptcy 3 times during his reign. Each time, the kingdom survived through loans and confiscated property. Each time, the foundation weakened. But Philip did not reduce spending on religious enforcement, did not compromise on doctrinal purity, did not consider that perhaps God's will might include economic pragmatism. The Netherlands, the wealthiest provinces of his empire, rebelled. For 80 years, they fought for independence. Philip poured money and lives into suppressing them, sent his best generals, authorized massive violence against Protestant rebels. The Dutch simply moved their trade elsewhere, built a maritime empire of their own, became wealthy through the very tolerance and pragmatism Philip despised. Philip watched his empire fracture. Protestant England survived and grew stronger. The Ottoman Empire continued threatening Mediterranean trade. France, though Catholic, pursued its own interests regardless of Philip's religious vision. And through it all, Philip continued working. 16-hour days, reading reports, making decisions, convinced that if he simply maintained absolute control over every detail, eventually everything would align with God's plan. His health deteriorated catastrophically. Gout so severe he could not walk. Open sores covering his body. Pain so intense he could not sleep. For 53 days before his death, he lay in agony, unable to move, surrounded by relics and priests. He died in September 1598, in the Escorial he had built, still clutching the same crucifix his father had held at his own death. His last words were prayers. His final act was to request that his coffin be positioned so that the altar was visible from where his body would lie. Even in death, Philip arranged every detail, maintained control, ensured that his final resting place reflected his vision of perfect order. What Philip II left behind was contradiction embodied. He expanded Spanish territory, but weakened Spanish power, created religious unity through the Inquisition, but alienated allies and trading partners, built magnificent palaces while bankrupting the kingdom, ruled an empire where the sun never set but spent most of his life in darkness, reading reports by candlelight. His personal life was marked by tragedy. 4 marriages, multiple children who died in infancy, the son he imprisoned, a life of constant work that brought no visible joy. But he also created structures that outlasted him. The bureaucratic systems he developed governed Spanish America for 3 more centuries. The Escorial remains one of the great architectural achievements of the Renaissance. The Spanish language spread across continents, carrying his vision of Catholic civilization. Protestant historians portrayed him as a tyrant and fanatic. Catholic historians defended him as a devoted servant of God. Both are correct and both are incomplete. Philip II was not a monster. He genuinely believed every action he took served a higher purpose. He did not pursue cruelty for its own sake, but as a tool for achieving spiritual purity. But sincerity does not excuse consequence. A man convinced he speaks for God becomes incapable of recognizing his own limitations. Every failure must be reinterpreted as divine mystery rather than human error. Every disaster becomes a test of faith rather than evidence that the approach itself might be flawed. Philip created a kingdom where certainty replaced doubt, where obedience replaced innovation, where purity replaced pragmatism. And that kingdom slowly suffocated under the weight of its own righteousness. The Spanish Empire survived him by centuries, but it never recovered the dynamism it had under his father. Philip transformed Spain from an expanding empire into a defensive fortress, holding territory but no longer believing conquest was possible, because to expand would require the very flexibility and tolerance he had spent 42 years suppressing. He was the most powerful man of Israel who lived like a monk, the absolute monarch who rarely appeared in public, the defender of faith who died watching his religious vision crumble. His subjects called him El Rey Prudente, the prudent king. But prudence and paralysis can look identical from the outside. The careful consideration of every decision becomes indistinguishable from the inability to make any decision without divine confirmation. In the end, what do we make of Philip II? He was not uniquely cruel. Many rulers of his era were more violent, more capricious, more personally brutal. He rarely ordered executions himself. He simply created systems that made executions systematic. He was not unintelligent. His attention to detail, his administrative innovations, his strategic patience, these were genuine talents applied with remarkable discipline. He was not insincere. Every piece of evidence suggests he truly believed he was serving God, that his suffering had meaning, that the pain he inflicted was necessary for salvation. But perhaps that is precisely what makes him so unsettling. Not that he was evil, but that he was so certain he was good. Not that he was a tyrant, but that he believed tyranny was love. Not that he was cruel, but that he redefined cruelty as mercy. The Inquisition tortured in the name of saving souls. The economic ruin was accepted as God's will. The son imprisoned because love of God exceeded love of family. The Armada destroyed and interpreted as divine message. Every disaster confirmed his worldview rather than challenging it. This is the psychology not of a monster, but of a true believer who has confused his will with divine will. So the question remains, was Philip II a man chosen by God to defend true faith in an age of heresy? Or was he a ruler who used God to justify his fear of a changing world, his paranoia about disorder, his terror of doubt, his need for absolute control? Perhaps the more important question is, can we ever truly distinguish between the two? When power and faith merge so completely that one becomes indistinguishable from the other, how do we separate divine mission from human obsession? Philip II spent 42 years answering that question in one direction. History has spent 4 centuries answering it in every direction simultaneously. What do you think? Can absolute religious certainty ever govern justly? Or does the very act of claiming to know God's will perfectly create the conditions for tyranny, even when, especially when, the ruler is sincere? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to explore more rulers who believe themselves instruments of divine will and the worlds they created from that belief, subscribe to Dark Ages Chronicles. Because every age has its certainties, and every certainty comes with a cost.